Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. Today we're talking about Annabelle Creation. So what did I think of Annabelle Creation? It was about what I thought it was going to be. I didn't really care much for the first Annabelle movie, and I didn't go into this one thinking it was going to be much better. And surprisingly, I wasn't disappointed. It was exactly what I thought it was going to be. A worthless piece of crap film. It tried really hard for a lot of jump scares, but went nowhere because they were hugely telegraphed and not even really a tense situation when they did pop up. And just overall, the story was kind of redundant and not necessary. But obviously, they want to keep making a franchise out of this thing for some reason because apparently people love the Annabelle doll for whatever reason. And it's like, move on to something else. The whole thing with The Conjuring 2, and Annabelle is they were focusing around the husband-wife couple of psychic investigators and their library of haunted items, or whatever they call it, that Annabelle now resides in. And instead of focusing just on the Annabelle doll, how about we look at some of the other things in their library and tell the stories of those, or how they got them, or whatever. And you can keep making Conjuring films just out of their library of oddities. But no, you keep focusing on this damn doll that no one really gives a shit about anymore. So the movie starts, I don't know what year, back probably 40s, 50s maybe. Well, maybe a little bit earlier than that. Back when automobiles were just starting to become more fairly common, where a lot more people had them. And we get to see the creation of Annabelle, which is a doll made by this craftsman. And Annabelle was the first of 100 that he was starting to make, but he ended up stopping making them after, I guess, the first one. Even though there were tons of parts laying around for the other ones, he just never really finished them. And the reason he didn't finish them was, spoiler, not really, his daughter dies. So of course they drive into town on a Sunday or whatever to go to church. They're driving back home and he has a flat tire and he's struggling to get the last lug nut off or something. And there's another car coming down the road and his wife's like, why don't I flag them down? Maybe they can give you a hand. And he's like, no, I got it. And right then the lug nut flies loose and goes flying off into the street. And his daughter's like, oh, don't worry, Dad, I'll get it. And just darts out in front of this car that her mother literally just said, oh, there's a car coming. Do you want me to stop them? And the dad said no. It's like, why would you then dart out into the street? You heard your mother say there was a car coming. I understand you want to help your dad out and being like, oh, I'll get that, Dad, but then look, there's a car coming. Again, I understand it was earlier times when cars weren't really that common of a thing and kids could run around the streets, but I feel like even at that age, they should have known that, especially if someone says, there's a car coming, not to run out on the damn road. So anyway, she gets nailed by the car and dies. And that kind of puts a stop to him making these dolls. Well, then we cut to years later. I want to say it was about 12 years later. And we have this group of kids and a nun that are coming to live with the husband and wife in their extravagant house because they're orphans and their orphanage got shut down. So he does the good Christian thing and allows them to come stay at his house. And of course, weird things start to happen as soon as they show up. And it's like, okay, well, why are things just now happening just because these kids showed up? So of course, we learn the backstory of the Annabelle doll through the course of the movie about how it came to life and blah, blah, blah. So creepy things start happening to this one kid out of the group who had a bout of polio and, she walks with crutches now, but she's getting better. She can start to walk a little bit. She only really has one crutch and one lame leg, but she can kind of move around and do things. And she's the one who first starts noticing the weird happenings in the house and is kind of drawn to them, trying to figure out what's going on. She tries to tell the one nun that's with them, and the nun's like, we shouldn't be snooping around the house and getting into things that we're told not to. If he kicks us out of here, we have no place to go. And doesn't really listen to the fact that she's telling her that weird things are going on and it could be evil. So then her best friend, who they're basically kind of adopted sisters to each other, even though they're not really sisters, starts to notice some of the weird stuff going on too. And you're like, okay, so it's going to come down to the point where the sister ends up being the one that causes the possession, I guess, and the one with the lame leg is the one who has to fight it off and prove that she's stronger than everyone thinks she is. I mean, it leads you to that for a long time, but then hard twist, it goes the exact opposite. Spoiler, by the way, in case you actually cared. It ends up being, in the long run, that the doll ends up possessing the cripple girl and magically cures her illness. so now she's no longer crippled. And it ends up being the younger sister who now has to fight off her best friend slash sister and try to stop this evil from taking her over. So the sister goes and talks to the man who owns the house and says, we went into your daughter's room even though you told us not to. And he goes, how'd you get in there? The door was locked. And she's like, no, it was open. And we found this doll. And he says, what doll? She describes it to him and he says, stay away from that doll. It's evil. And then he kind of walks off and he goes to confront the other girl and the doll itself and ends up dying. Spoiler again. So then the nun goes to talk to the wife who's been sick through the whole thing and can't get out of bed. The wife finally tells her the story of how the doll became possessed and how after they lost their daughter, they prayed to whoever would listen for just one chance to get to hear her voice again or talk to her again or whatever. And she slowly started to reappear around the house only in glimpses, like they would hear her laugh or like hear footsteps running through a room or whatever. And eventually they couldn't physically touch her, but eventually they were able to see her. And it was like she lived there again, but they couldn't directly interact with her. And so then they gave her permission to move into the doll as an anchor to stay in this world so that they might eventually be able to physically touch her again. So they gave her permission, and then eventually they realized that it wasn't their daughter, it was a demon. So they had a priest come in and they basically locked the thing into their daughter's closet and blessed the closet and everything, so as long as it was in there, it was supposed to be idle. And it stayed idle for 12 years until they brought the girls to the house, and that's what woke it back up. Which doesn't really make a lot of sense. Could have been its own movie in itself. We could have saw them dealing with their daughter's death and it leading up to everything, and then had a second Annabelle movie be like when the girls came to the house, but this is creation, so obviously it's going to lead into more stuff. So once the wife tells the sister about, the doll is actually evil, it's possessed by a demon, whatever, the nun tries to go out and fight it, and eventually they're able to sever the link, or so they think, between the doll and the girl, but the girl ends up disappearing and they can't find her. So they're like, well, she's a kid with polio, how far away could she have gotten? And basically they kind of have the doll there, and they're like, well, whatever evil was in this is gone now, it was expelled, so do what you want with the doll. And nobody wants anything to do with the doll, so the priest just kind of throws it in the trunk of his car and is kind of forgotten about, which doesn't really make sense with the mid-credit scene, but I'll get to that in a minute. So then we cut to another orphanage a few years later, where the girl who had polio, the one who was possessed by the doll, is living in this orphanage, being a good, quiet girl like she's supposed to, being idle for another however many years, until a family comes and adopts her. And when they ask her name, instead of saying her actual name, she says her name is Annabelle. So they adopt her, and then it cuts to another 12 years later, which goes into the opening scene of the first Annabelle film, where the couple hears a noise when they're in bed, and they get up, and the father goes to investigate while the mother calls 911. And then the girl comes in and slashes his throat, and it turns out to be his daughter Annabelle, and blah, 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 blah. And then it cuts over to the neighbors coming over to investigate. So basically, she was possessed by the doll, was adopted, grew up to be this girl who joined the cult or whatever, killed her parents, and blah, blah, blah. So it basically segues into the next one, so I can kind of see why they wanted to tell this story before going into the story of the farmer and his wife, although that would have made more sense to be the Annabelle creation, and then had a sequel to Annabelle creation, which would have been leading up to where they led it up to, and then it kind of comes full circle. But then again, I guess it is kind of that whole Star Wars thing, where had we seen episodes 1, 2, and 3 before 4, 5, and 6, the whole spoiler of Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father wouldn't have been that big of a surprising reveal by the time it came around, because everyone would have already known that. So I kind of see where they're going with this, but there is still potential for the farmer's story, but it's kind of already been revealed, and I don't really know if it has enough of a leg to stand on its own. So that's basically the movie, more or less. More stuff happens in it than that, but that's the basic rundown of it. So what would I give as far as a star rating? I don't know. Again, it kind of falls into a pointless movie where nothing really happens. So I think I'm going to have to stick with the ratings for the last few videos and just give this one a 2. I mean, it's more or less a middle-of-the-road film, but I think it misses a lot of potential and is just harkening on a story that doesn't really need to be told anymore. We're kind of past it. So it doesn't quite deserve to be a 3, even though it's a middle-of-the-road film. So yeah, I'm going to bump it down to a 2. I don't think it quite deserves to be lower than that. It was enough of a movie to watch, but like I said, they tried to do a couple of jump scares, but they didn't really earn the jump scare. Like, they didn't even make me jump. I think one point I kind of looked up because I was looking down at something in the bottom of the screen and something happened. I just kind of like shifted my attention to what was going on at the top of the screen. But overall, it didn't really set up jump scares right. There wasn't any tension at the times they came about. It's just kind of like, here's the thing, and it's like, okay. was I supposed to be scared of that? Because you did nothing to set that up or anything. And it wasn't even that they were telegraphing them like most jump scares are, where they get that stinger going. It's just, hey, here's the thing, check it out, and be scared, and it's, no, I'm not. So yeah, it missed quite a bit that it could have actually played with, but overall, it was watchable, I guess. So yeah, like I said, it doesn't deserve to be lower than a 2, but it doesn't deserve to be a 3, so it gets a 2 from me. So that's it for this episode. Again, as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. The links are down in the description. Click the bell wherever it is on the screen so you get notifications every time I post new content. And until next time, I'll see you after the credits.